Hey everyone, it's the Koopa Man. So remember how I defended Kenobi before it was released because we didn't know if it was good or bad? Well, believe it or not, on some corners of the internet, that makes me a simp, because simping means being level-headed and reasonable. Anyway, since it has come out, I have seen some of it, and well, I am not impressed. Granted, I did not see the whole series, so if you want to ask someone who has, go ask Tracer. But to summarize how I feel, I can put it like this. They set it too far after Revenge of the Sith for the story they wanted to tell, and the villains, aside from Vader, and ironically the Grand Inquisitor, who was weak in his previous appearances, were weak. Reva's acting felt forced and like it should have been cut and done again, and her redemption arc is very obviously the result of a rewrite and thus very much unearned. Speaking of the rewrite, it brings up the question, why? According to the rumor, the original script included a romance subplot between Obi-Wan and a woman named Tala, which would have had references to Obi-Wan's previous romance subplot between him and the Grand Duchess of Mandalore, Satine Kryze. Temuera Morrison was also slated to appear as Commander Cody, and would have had an integral character as well as a subplot about him getting over the guilt of what Order 66 made him do to his best friend. And Reva would have had a more interesting villain arc and would have died at the end. Now, the changes in the plot can be summed up to contract issues, or maybe there was issues between filming this and Book of Boba Fett, but that last bit about the fate of Reva and her character arc makes me sure of one thing. The rewrite of Kenobi is the biggest own goal for the fandom menace, and it cannot be denied. Let me explain. Star Wars for a while has had an issue. No matter what they put out, it'd get hated on, and by the same people, members of the so-called fandom menace, a group of YouTubers and social media influencers who mainly made their popularity off bashing the Star Wars sequels. You see, after the release of the Disney Star Wars sequels, mostly The Last Jedi, a group of internet critics and fans swarmed around them to trash on them, and rightfully so. The Disney sequels were not good movies, and certainly weren't good Star Wars movies, and deserve every bit of criticism they receive. That said, it did something else as well. A number of these people were only made internet famous by these criticisms and reviews, and with that came money, and with money comes incentive to continue. You can see where this is going. Like with the mainstream media creating future mass shooters by glamorizing every time there is a mass shooting and glorifying the shooters, having their names and faces smeared all over the news cycle, the popular backlash at the Star Wars sequels created a if it bleeds, it leads culture of what I like to call muckraker criticism. Because like a muckraker journalist only interested in getting the glamorous and glorious bloody story that trivializes a disaster, the muckraker critic is only looking to tear apart anything and everything that may be considered popular or mainstream, and in the process creating their own sheep-like mentality while calling others who fall outside of their manufactured worldview sheep. If it seems like I'm being harsh, it's only because I am, and you gotta understand it's coming from a place of concern. I've seen this happen before. Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Aaron the Egotistical? I thought not. It's not a story the Fandom Menace would tell you. It's a Sonic fandom legend. Darth Aaron was a critic, so powerful and so egotistical he could use his influence to create change in franchises. He had such a knowledge of the YouTube algorithms and social media that he could even change a game franchise he never was interested in at all. The dark side of influence is a pathway to many abilities some would consider unnatural. He became so powerful that the only thing he was afraid of was losing his power, which eventually of course he did. Unfortunately, he taught the internet critics everything he knew, and then they killed him in his decline. He could change the fate of franchises, but not his own.
Ironic.
Of course, critics at the end of the day are the channelers of the fandom. Their fandoms, mostly. The mistake companies make is thinking that someone that's a fan of Egoraptor necessitates them being a fan of Sonic, and that it's one-to-one enough to use them as market research. Egoraptor was never a fan of the 3D Sonic games, or really Sonic at all. Sonic Team was using him and his criticisms to build their series, and that was a mistake. As such, we eventually got Sonic Forces. A culmination of everything the critics and, quote, fans said they wanted out of Sonic. And it was awful. To quote a video a friend once sent me, if you only ever complain, then it becomes background noise and they stop listening. When they do something good and you support it, they're more likely to do it again. All Egoraptor and the misled Sonic fans around him ever did was complain. While Sonic has had legitimate reasons to criticize the series, look no further than Sonic 06, they lost sight of the good. And as a result, Sonic Team got more and more frustrated and felt the need to constantly change and reinvent Sonic, which inevitably gave us Sonic Forces, but I repeat myself. Why would, or for that matter, should a creator listen to people who'll never be satisfied or approach their works with malicious intent? Sure, the Fandom Menace started out with good intentions. They were upset at the sequels and what the sequels did to the franchise at large. But eventually, it stopped being about drawing attention to legitimate flaws and more about preaching to the choir and raking in ad bucks and super chats. Many of them even stopped actually consuming the media they criticize outside of token attempts to make money off their audience. Rags and Mauler have even talked over crucial lines in the Book of Boba Fett, then pretended they never happened. That is not something that someone who is approaching a work honestly and constructively would do. And if they're not going to be honest and constructive, then why are they paying money for the product? Well, that's the fun part. They're not. Many of the so-called Fandom Menace stopped engaging with the Star Wars franchise entirely monetarily. If they do watch anything, it's usually through, less than legitimate means.
Do what you want, cause a pirate is free. You are a pirate. You're our favorite indeed. Being a pirate is a right to be. Do what you want, cause a pirate is free. You are a pirate.
And there isn't anything wrong with that per se. It is their right to decide what they want to spend their money on and what not to spend their money on. The problem is these people by and large won't, and they never will. If they wanted to, they would have spent their money on The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, Bad Batch, or every other non-awful Star Wars project that has come out since. They haven't, and they advise others not to. So why does their opinion still matter? Well, you know how Sonic Team took Egoraptor's criticisms on board as constructive? Well, my belief is that the producers of Kenobi took the Fandom Menace into account as well. And rather than try to make a show based on what they want, which would have been the most boring and sterile crap to ever be made, I mean, Mauler and Rags are fans of Spider-Man Far From Home, for God's sakes, they decided to do the opposite, out of spite. Which is just as bad a choice, to be perfectly honest. It's clear some on the production team at Star Wars do care what the Fandom Menace says, and they hate it. And instead of ignoring it, they do like so many lolcows before them have done. Feed the trolls. And you must never feed the trolls. And in doing so, the toxic symbiotic relationship continues. People like Kathleen Kennedy need people like EFAP to support their narrative, and people like EFAP need Kathleen Kennedy to rake super chats off of. To end on a more positive note though, Sonic Team has recently fired Aaron Hansen Egoraptor as an influencer representative for their upcoming game Sonic Frontiers. Even funnier, he was replaced with Inugami Karon.
I'm a guy. Thank you, whoever.
What?
This just shows that it's possible to separate the critics from the fans and the fandom from the customers. If Star Wars can learn this lesson, and the consistent, decent products coming from the team run by Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, both of whom had nothing to do with Kenobi, and if they did, they were removed from it very early on, it may be possible for a second coming of quality Star Wars. Just as long as you ignore the unpleasable Fandom Menaces and focus on making actual entertaining stories. Not propaganda, stories. Time will tell. Until then, this has been the Koopa Man. Game on.